Hi there, I'm Dr. Jill Wener. I'm a physician, a meditation teacher, tapping practitioner, author, podcaster, and aspiring anti-racist, which means constant self-evaluation, learning, and willingness to be wrong. And I am so excited to have Brandee Blocker Anderson here with me today. She's a lawyer, a teacher, an activist, an entrepreneur. She's the CEO and founder of the Antiracism Academy. And I'm a bit of a fangirl. She is part of my anti-racism, conscious anti-racism Facebook group, and she posts the best content in there ever. And so I'm just so grateful that you're joining me today, Brandee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. As like Jill said, my name is Brandee Blocker Anderson, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Antiracism Academy, which is an e-learning startup that helps parents and teachers learn and teach their children about issues of race and racism. I am so excited to be starting this new chapter of my life. So again, like Jill said, I come from a legal background. So for the last few years, I've been practicing corporate transactional law. And before that, I was a teacher. And so I think all of my experiences, both in getting a master's in education and studying political science, and obviously going to law school, I think all roads have always led back to my core principles, which is the idea that, all of the privilege that I've been afforded in my life through my education, through my life experiences, is really all towards helping the most oppressed among us. So just take a step back. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I come from a extremely economically disadvantaged background. So both of my parents were addicts. My father passed when I was very young. My family experienced a lot of poverty growing up. I changed schools a ton of times. I went to 6 different public schools before the 6th grade. And so having that background of a lot of sort of hardship has been sort of paired with also having had a lot of really amazing, wonderful experience. So in the 6th grade, I was able to go to a scholarship-based boarding school, which put me on the path to being able to go to Yale and Penn and Columbia, which is sort of a world apart, right, from the world that I come from. But I've always carried that ground with me of, one, trying to figure out, why did the world I grow up in look the way it did? I know that, my mom and my dad, they weren't bad people. And looking around at the people in my neighborhood, they weren't, I don't think there was anything pathological innately about them. And so I always wondered, why is my world different than what I saw on TGIF, for example, and all of these images of whiteness and wealth and poverty, and me growing up as an African American person in a predominantly Black, or I won't say predominantly Black, but a largely Black city. I grew up also in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. But I also went to school with white children, so I got to see a bit of diversity, but there was always a stark difference between my existence and the world I saw on television. And so, of course, a lot of these issues weren't talked about when I was a kid, so I came to the conclusion that outside of the poor white folks from my neighborhood, pretty much all white people were rich and all poor people were Black. And my only reference point for other groups of people were perhaps, visiting stores, or I just had a very, very insular experience. So fast forward to high school, I got to start traveling outside of the country for the first time. And so this is me, a girl coming from North Philly. And then the school I ended up going to for middle and high school was a boarding school. So I lived on campus 5 days a week. And so again, not a lot of experience. So I go from a predominantly Black environment to going to England, Cambridge, England for the first time, which was just a mind-boggling experience. Not only because the country is pretty, obviously it's not monolithic, but it's pretty monochromatic in comparison to where I was from. In the program I was in, I was one of 2 Black students out of like 400. So it was the very first time I had the experience of feeling like a minority and starting to understand the importance of race in my life outside of just wondering why the sort of structural issues were there. But I guess my true awakening, though, to these issues came in college, when I got to college, once I started reading about the histories. So my focus in political science was on urban studies. And so, which meant I took a lot of African American studies classes, sociology classes, and I remember being so angry. I went back home after my first semester of college, and I remember talking to one of my history teachers, like, why did you lie to me? Like, why did you lie to us? Like, you said that Black people benefited from the New Deal, but I learned in my urban studies class that that's not true. Like, African Americans were largely locked out of those programs because domestic workers and agricultural workers weren't afforded those opportunities, which was predominantly what Black people did for a living during that time, and just other things like that. And I remember just feeling so, just like angry, just really, really angry, and not knowing what to do with that energy. And so I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer for a long time. At first, just for the sort of intellectual aspect of it, but once I got a little older in high school, I realized there was a lot of good work that people could do in helping people. In particular, I thought I was going to go into public interest work. I interned at a pro bono legal services organization in high school, which was awesome because coming full circle 10 years later, I was able to do a lot of pro bono work on behalf of that organization as a lawyer. But I knew I wasn't quite ready to go to law school yet. And so I ended up doing Teach for America. I came back to Philadelphia, and please feel free to like edit out any of this.
I usually don't edit my episodes at all unless like someone vomits or something like that. And everything you're saying is good. So please continue. I'm really fascinated by your background and how you got to be doing the work you're doing.
Awesome. So I ended up doing Teach for America. And for me, I know that, that organization for some in some circles has sort of a dirty name, and I definitely understand the criticisms. I think they recruit heavily from schools like Yale, and I definitely have some critiques that I can reserve for another conversation. But that opportunity allowed me to come back to Philadelphia and to work in schools with kids who were just like me. So I ended up working at an African-centered school called Sankofa Freedom Academy Charter School, which was a really amazing experience, of all places for me to end up, for me to be able to come back to Philly and teach at a school that was very much aligned with my sort of newfound radicalization as far as understanding the importance of anti-racist work, and also recognizing how just like fundamentally racist our education system is in the way that it educates all children, but in particular the harm it causes to children of color. So to be able to go into a school environment where like that was already understood and that we were all expected to actively work against the Eurocentric histories that whitewash the legacies and contributions of people of color, we were always challenged to think about, no matter what we were teaching, whether it was from the traditional sort of Western canon or more or books and texts from writers of color, we were always challenged to think like how is this text or how is this assignment like helping these students towards their liberation, and beyond that, sort of how are these texts not only helping to liberate them, but liberate them as African people. And so of course the school I'll say is predominantly Black. It's not 100%, but even still, there's an emphasis that of Africa being the mother continent and being the foundation of life, and just so many positive aspects that really children of all races can like feel a sense of pride and knowing that they're a part of a legacy of something larger than themselves. So that was a really incredible experience. Obviously, teaching is like one of the hardest things ever. I was a English and social studies teacher, so I did that for 2 years while I was getting my master's. But ultimately, I recognized that I could be the best teacher and bring myself 100% every day, which I did, and I love my kids, my kids love me, but the structural issues impacting their lives and their outcomes are just so great that I realized that while being quote unquote in the trenches is important and we need people there, I wanted to dedicate my life to sort of affecting change in a more macro level way. So and a couple of examples that remind me of this fact. So I had one student who he used to put his head down a lot in class, and so that was a no-no in my class, especially with like the Teach for America thing. And I had, you know, 10 people coming to watch me, and not just, you know, obviously the kids shouldn't sleep during a lesson, they can't learn that way, but there's also immense amount of pressure on me. I'm being like recorded and, you know, assessed and judged, and there was all this teacher effectiveness talk. But anywho, I ended up calling his mom because it had happened, you know, a number of times in class, and she's like, oh yeah, he just hasn't had his insulin in the last couple of months. And it was just such an eye-opening moment, and those moments will come up all the time where like I'm just so focused on like I need to be effective, I need you to get this lesson, but like he hasn't had his insulin in 2 months.
Yeah, I just feel like I got kicked in the gut hearing you say that.
It's just like, you know, or I had another student who she was like acting out in class, and I was getting frustrated with her, and I called her mom to find out, you know, what was going on with her. She's like, oh yeah, you know, my brother just was murdered last night in front of her. Like he was killed at our house, and you know she's in school the next day. And so I'm like, you know, like kicking myself for being like, you know, frustrated with her, because I'm like, this is just so unfair. Um, and so I think for me that really strengthened my resolve to continue on my journey to going to law school. And in my mind, the goal was to one, gather as much information as far as the sort of, I call it evil sorceries, you know, just sort of in a tongue-in-cheek way, but there is a whole language of power in the form of the law, in the form of policies, and even being able to engage in those conversations, be at the table, whether it's like in a courtroom setting, which I think is a lot of what people think about when it comes to law. But what I realize is that the law touches so many aspects of our lives, and most people only, you know, they only see litigators on television, so that's all they think of. But I wanted to become a transactional attorney because I wanted to be able to um, affect change on a interpersonal level, but also using those same tools to build towards a sort of more macro level changes. So my goal sort of shifted to opening a community development corporation. And so that's still a long-term goal of mine. Coming from a very economically depressed neighborhood, I recognize the importance of both education, but also home ownership and like being able to build wealth within communities. And so I went into real estate law because in my mind, like, all right, like that is the one thing that Black people traditionally have not had access to. And that is how white people traditionally or historically in this country have been able to build intergenerational wealth. And so I went into the corporate space recognizing that I would be learning a lot about how the sort of powers that be do business. So that's, I guess, what I mean when I say like evil sorceries. But learning the skills that I could take with me, even if I decided to leave that space and do something else. And so I had a positive experience for my first couple of years overall, but I think it's kind of well known that the big law world, meaning like major international law firms, are not the most friendly to women or people of color, particularly Black women. There's just like a crazy high attrition rate, in part because the work-life balance is just not manageable for a lot of people, especially if you have a family. Like it's very customary for people to pull multiple all-nighters and stay at work until 3 a.m. on a regular basis. And I had my son actually a month before I took the bar exam. So I came in, yeah, crazy. So I came into the profession like with a newborn. And so after my first couple of years, I decided to transition to in-house work, which was a lot more manageable for me as far as the work-life balance of it all. And I got a lot more experience doing the transactional work, but even in those spaces, I still found myself gravitating towards the more like social justice, DEI sort of work. And so at my last firm, I became the chair of the Diverse Associates Group. And so I was in charge of putting on programming for the firm's events, in particular for, you know, the firm's associates of color. And then I joined the firm's like Black Lawyers Network and was able to influence change in that way. So one thing I was especially proud of was getting the firm to change all their lock screens to images of Black people during Black History Month, which apparently was like a huge deal for some people because the firm is just such an overwhelmingly white male space. So to even like have something so small, like this one secretary told me, she was a Black woman, she said she cried when she saw it, and she
Oh,
showed her like pastor, and she's like, I've been working here for 30 years, and all my years I never would have thought I'd see the day of something like this happening. So I realized that that work spoke to me a lot more than like the contract that I was working on.
yeah.
And so even once I transitioned to Comcast, I still hadn't let that still was a big part of what I wanted my mantra to be. And so so fast forward to the pandemic, I started thinking more and more about just like the idea of my value and like what I'm bringing, and just feeling like although the law and like my job is important and I, enjoy it, I couldn't help but feeling like there's more than this, right? Like I could get on this like sort of corporate, I don't know, what's the word?
Hamster wheel.
Hamster wheel, and like maybe I'll work up the ranks and become the general counsel of Comcast, but like is that really like what I want? Am I doing work that gels with my spirit? Do I feel like I'm being valued? Do I feel like the folks here value what I'm bringing? And it got to a point where I was feeling that way less and less. And luckily though, I had the idea of starting an online company had come to me. At first, I was going to do a sort of a subscription-based box, and it would be a lot more based on like physical materials and helping parents sit down with kids and do activities. And that was my sort of mindset. And then I pivoted to an online model, and thinking about accessibility. So how can I get this in the hands of as many people as possible, and how to make it as accessible as possible as far as cost, not only to the customer, but obviously to myself, and having to, have inventory and all these things. So I'm really excited that I did. And so anywho, the idea for the company was really based on a couple of things. So one, that like feeling I had in college of like, I was lied to. Like, why did I have to go to Yale to learn like very basic facts about American history? And what would it look like if kids started learning these things a lot sooner? Another touch point moment for me was after the murder of George Floyd, in this sort of moment that the country had where I know both like at my job and just on the news, there was all of these there was this big push for conversations around race that I think have been lacking for a while. And so that was in part, that also was a part of my impetus. Like, okay, so there are more and more people who are interested in learning about these things. But then, beyond the sort of, and I don't want to call it a fad, because I think people who are truly committed to anti-racism, it's not. It's something that, maybe they became awakened to it last spring. But, if it's something they truly care about, it's still something that sits with them, especially in light of the recent events in the country. But so I saw my sort of target audience as being both people who already get it and who are in need of resources. So I remember working at Sankofa and trying to find resources to help teach either new texts or traditional texts, but always like basing it in this idea of Black liberation. And there's just like not a lot of resources out there, incidentally. And so I know like there's already a population of teachers who are doing this work who need resources, but then there are, also people who are just starting to come into this. And obviously there's a ton of stuff out there on the internet, but my thought was to sort of help fill in those gaps by one, bringing a lot of the stuff together under one roof, but then also scaffolding it, meaning having the concepts build on each other as opposed to having just a bunch of different lessons that are kind of disjointed. So I've been thinking a lot around, what does an anti-racist curriculum look like? And so on the one hand, there's this idea of like, well, we need like immediate anti-bias or anti-racist intervention work now. Like there's some things that like people need to just stop doing right now. that we don't have time to teach you a whole history of the world and why all these things are bad. We just need to like address it so people can feel safe and be like able to exist in a space. And on the other side, there's a sort of more long-term work of people who are invested in these issues that, you know, if you don't have that foundation, if you don't know why things are set up the way they are, then, you know, just because you may seem nice on the surface, and I think that's where we are in this country, there's a lot of politeness, and maybe we're kind of backing off from that, unfortunately, but it's more just like concealed racism because we're not talking about it. Because talking about it is seen as impolite as opposed to, you know, ignoring it, which I think is a bigger issue. But in any event, my thought was to start a company that would cater to kids and parents or parents and teachers of kids from preschool to pre-college. And the more thought I've given it, I'm thinking of now even expanding that even more to prenatal to pre-college, recognizing that racism starts to impact kids' lives before they're even born. So that program would be geared towards helping expecting parents and healthcare professionals with helping expecting parents, in particular women of color who we know have such crazy high maternal and infant mortality rates. Giving them the resources and the knowledge they need to be able to advocate for themselves. But on the flip side, also being able to like help these healthcare providers understand like where those points of tension are coming from and why these outcomes are so disparate between groups of people. I know so many people don't think that they have a racist bone in their body, and they just can't see it. So I think the more that we raise awareness and the more programs, whether it's, you know, like your group and this podcast, and I mean, there's just so many different folks I see out here, you know, either doing diversity work as volunteer work or like selling courses. And so I thought to myself, well, you know, I have a contribution to make as well. And so, yeah, I'll stop there. I've said a lot.
Well, your background is thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think what you're doing is so important. I relate a lot because I was in medicine and then was like, it's fine. There's something when I started doing more meditation type stuff. And so I relate to that, like call to something different. And then even going from that into doing anti-racism stuff. But so what, so many questions. I want to ask about your content because you find like your YouTube video, and for anyone who is not, I'm going to put the link to your YouTube video in the show notes, but you did this YouTube video on the movie Soul. And I love your approach because your like production is fabulous. Everything is just like nice and there's like points and it's well edited, and could learn a lot from that. To say the least. Like I have zero production, but that's not even that's like the least important thing is your production, but it's also, they are well done.
Thank you.
Like picking these things out, because I watched it and the amount of work that I've done in myself on anti-racism stuff. And I love the like spiritual aspect of it. So I really connected in that way. But like, you know, I watched that movie with my family and I loved every second of it. And I was literally like, this is maybe the best movie I've ever seen in my whole life. And we watched a special on it afterwards that one of the writers is Black, and there was a whole behind the scenes of Pixar with him. And then I watch your video and I'm like hit in the face in the best possible way. Just like, oh man, there's so much in this world that's so easy to miss. And I guess, how do you pick your content? And because I don't know if I've watched it yet, but you have one on To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm forgetting the one that you just put out this week. I watched also and also loved, but of course the topic is.
The other one is Miles Morales, the comic book character.
Yeah. And then you did another one just this week.
Yes, it was on Martin Luther King and white privilege.
Yes, exactly. By the way, one of my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. lines is like, the white moderate is the enemy. And most people don't know that he said that. And I'm like, that's us, guys. Come on, we can do better. But so how do you find the content, because it resonates? And then I guess question 2 is, how do you deal with the people that are like, nah, not that we're not having it?
So to answer your first question, I think for me, a lot of my choice in content, it's a mixture of a couple of things. So one is me saying to myself, well, what content do I want to see? What can I contribute to the conversation? So for example, like the MLK video I just put out, it's I think it's one of those speeches that, so few people have ever seen. And it's one of those situations where I think his history has been just so sanitized, and people, like conservatives love him, like liberals love him. It's like, do you really love him? Because if you like knew everything, like kind of like you say with the line about the white moderate. And so my hope was to, just uncover, something that, people may not have ever seen or really thought about. And I think that goes for a lot of my content. So like, for example, with the movie Soul, and it's funny because I don't know if I had realized that this was such a universally loved movie, I probably would have still made the video. But I think I kind of naively published it like, oh, my videos up until now, like the most one of them got was like maybe 1,200 views, which is like huge for me to like, oh wow, like over 1,000 views. And so at this point, this video is like 20,000 views. So
Ooh, you're going viral. That's good.
It's great. It's amazing. But I definitely did not realize the hornet's nest I was walking into. And so for me, that film was sort of a part of a series that I've started, which is really around the idea of helping parents and teachers analyze kids' content for racial bias. And I think a point to bring up, or an important point to note, is that racism in a lot of people's minds is a very flat concept. So it has to be like a minstrel show, right, in order for it to be racist, or it has to be like blackface or something like very like in your face. Or to be a racist, you have to be a member of the KKK. And it's like, no, like there's more nuance to these things than that. And like some things are very in your face, and like, we can all, recognize it. And then some things are a little more subtle. And so I think for me, watching the film, like I just had a completely different lens on. And I don't even think I went into it, I wanted to like it, honestly, because I like I said in the video, like I am a huge fan of Jamie Foxx and Felicia Rashad and Angela Bassett. And I mean, like just looking at reading over the cast and crew, like it seems like they had a dream team of folks behind it. But yeah, I came away with a completely different experience as everyone else. So that one was, yeah, I didn't even realize how popular it was, but it's something that I know a lot of parents will be showing to their kids. And so I guess for me, I'm not indicting. Well, I guess the video was it was a little harsh. I'm not gonna lie. I
Have to like do that tone a little bit on. There's like a way to do social media to get like watch it. So like I don't regret. I'm glad you did every bit of it exactly as you did do it, because it's not your job to make people feel better about themselves. It's your job to educate people, and
yeah. So that's been the thing I've been struggling with, because my thought behind even starting the YouTube video, or the YouTube channel rather, was one, using the channel as a sort of marketing vehicle for for the paid content, and just getting my brand out there. And I love YouTube. I don't know, like I watch YouTube more than I watch regular TV. And so starting a YouTube channel has been on my mind for a couple of years, even before I thought about using it in a way to like make money, just more so for fun. But there's that aspect of it. But dealing with the like naysayers and the non-believers and the people who would never ever consider buying my product, or like that part, I was kind of hoping that part of the internet wouldn't find my channel. Which again is the kind of naive, because so I took a course in how to do YouTube, and sort of thinking about or learning about search engine optimization and keywords and all of these things. And so I tried to optimize the video, obviously, to get the maximum number of views. But I'm like, oh man, the internet found me.
They found me, and I have like 120 followers on YouTube. You know, like I have like an extraordinarily small number, but they find me, and they're scary. Like they're scary.
It
Yeah.
is. So I had one commenter tell me that people like me are the reason they wish slavery still exists. Like the number of comments. So I have like there are probably about 400 comments right now under that video, and there's still probably like hundreds more held in review. And so at first, like it was just like overwhelming. Like I don't even know how to. And so I tried to start to like respond to people because part of the work is trying to educate people, especially if folks seemed like earnest in their discussion points and weren't just trying to like attack me. And so I definitely did a lot of that, but like that could be a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like that's been definitely, it's been a challenge. It's definitely been a challenge, but I'm also really grateful because it's called like my channel has grown. I've gained like a couple hundred subscribers since I posted the video, and my channel is like it's gained like a crazy number of views. So it's sort of bittersweet because I have gotten a lot of hate,
Yeah.
but sort of comes to the territory.
Well, you know what? I feel like there's people who are like, I love being wrong because I'm like, oh, there's no shame in it, like I could dwell on the, but like thinking about the man whose identity was mistaken, and he came and took his soul out, and then he was like, and then he's like, and stop eating junk food. Like, how did I not see that? I'm trauma informed. Like, I'm a tapping practitioner. Like, and so I think it's so important that you're helping people do that, like see these things, because I was interviewing a woman named Melissa Shaw, who's a yoga therapist, an Indian woman, talking about cultural appropriation. And I asked her, this is such a great response she gave. I said, what are like 3 things white people can look for, or not white people, anyone can look for to recognize cultural appropriation? And she said, that's not the right question to ask. The question is to ask, why did you find that person? What attracted you to that voice, that leader, that whoever, to begin with? And
Exactly.
so when people find themselves being like, I love this movie, it was amazing, why did I think it was so amazing? And what resonated with me and my state of consciousness that made me not see those things? So
Absolutely. And I think, and that's part of also film writing. And so I think a lot of folks, they missed in my critique was sort of thinking about, so they were sort of focused on like, oh, like you're not understanding the in-universe like logic of it. And like, he didn't mistake him. Like, this is why it happened. And 22 is not a white woman. She's just a soul and genderless and all of these things. It's like, listen, like I get all of that. Like I saw the film. I see what they were going for. But if you read this on another level, like there's a whole other set of implications. And I think a lot of it goes to your question, like, in asking, well, what part of the film or what part of this story was most compelling to you? And from a lot of the comments I got, it seemed like most people were really drawn to the 22 character played by Tina Fey. And so like, that's fine. But like, what are the implications of that when this film was sort of billed as Pixar's first Black animated protagonist, when you come away sympathizing more with the non-Black character? Or I mean, and especially the whole, just the idea that he stole her life away, or that like the whole trade-off. Like, I'm so glad the film did not end with him dying, because that would have been like
yeah,
just like too much for my soul to bear.
right.
But and so of course a lot of the response from people is, oh, it's not that serious, or you're nitpicking. I think what's hard for me, or it has been people, and I have to, obviously like grow some thicker skin if I want to be doing this work, but people questioning my intention, like, oh, you know, you're the problem. And so I can recognize that as like, okay, you just don't understand. Like, talking about racism isn't racist. But people who are saying, oh, you're just doing this for clicks, or the nice thing is I've had some people who I engage with in a conversation, and they're like, oh, like, you really do care. Like, this isn't just to be I guess like inflammatory or whatever. Like, no, like, this is truly how I feel. Like, I'm not making any of this up. Like, and it's not just based on opinion. It is obviously my opinion, but it's informed by, you know, tons of books and articles and experiences that I've had. So
Yeah, and everything you
yeah.
said resonated as like cold hard, like white gaze. You know what I mean? Like it was everything you said was dead on, in my opinion. And not that I'm the one that gets to grant legitimacy to your work, but I from my perspective, everything you said I learned from. So
I
that,
appreciate that. And I have had plenty of people who were like, you know, it's funny because different parts of my argument resonated with different people. So some people were like, you know, I don't buy your whole point about, you know, the whole like dynamic between Tina Fey's character or his body being voiced by the 22 character, and whether or not, you know, we should be reading that character as white, and all of that. But like the point you made about the way Black women are portrayed is like, you know, spot on. Or people will say, you know, like that whole point you made about, you know, Black women, like that's wrong, and you know. And it's funny because I think a lot of people have sort of projected a lot of their own, obviously, a lot of people brought a lot of themselves into the film.
yeah,
And so obviously with like nearly 400,000 people gone who were here last year, I think a lot more people are dealing with death, which the film grapples with, and also just like feeling kind of like life is a little meaningless, and like, you know, trying to find something to hold on to. And so I definitely, I'm sorry to all the folks for whom like I ruined that for. You know, I think there are a lot of things in this world that we can take the good and bad from. But for me, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to let my son watch that. Like, this doesn't portray this Black male character in a very positive light. I think, you know, in the end, you know, they wrap it up with a bow because that's kind of what kids' movies need to do. But you know, the idea that a this teacher who has so much going for him, like he had two job offers, a job like a full-time job offer working for the school he's been working at, and the opportunity to work for his like idol in this band, but yet he's like, you know what, you deserve like
yeah.
you deserve this more than I do. And like that message just like for me, I'm like, I can't do it. But I've been trying to like, and the more I read the comments, the more I understand what people did get out of it. But again, it's just like the gulf of not necessarily of information. So I don't think you have to be a race expert in order to like up on these things, but it does take a little bit of socialization and reading in order to start to see the stuff. And so it's been a challenge.
I just think it's so important because movies like or shows like The Queen's Gambit and everything. Like I cried when her friend came back at the end. I cried. I was a sucker for it. Like the magical Black woman character. I fell for it. And then I was like, I knew that there was something off. So I like actually did a search for it and like read about it and found articles about it that like confirmed my like, this is something not quite right. But it's so the the white supremacy culture is so ingrained in our culture that it's hard, you can't see it sometimes. Not you, I don't want to use the word you. I
It's
can't see
true.
it.
A lot of people,
Lots of people can't see it because
and it's built
it's
that way.
normal, you know. So
Exactly.
it's so hard to see it when that's all you've ever seen. So,
Exactly. Exactly. And then also just going back to the whole idea of children who, you know, just don't have the life experience, don't have the knowledge base to be able to sort of understand and sort of yeah, make sense of the things they're seeing. Like I remember as a kid watching, you know, all the Disney movies that came out in the 90s. So like for example, Pocahontas. Like I love Pocahontas. Like it was like my favorites. I mean, at that point, I want to say so it was like her and Princess Jasmine were the closest like we got to like having Black princesses. Um, but like growing up and like reading about this true story of Pocahontas and just like that movie to me, like I can't see it the same. I mean,
right.
I still think, you know, I'm sure the animation is beautiful and the music and all these things, but like, wow, Disney, like, really? So I mean, I think a part of it is, you know, recognizing that we all have these blindnesses. You know, even and it doesn't make you a bad person. Like I think a lot of the negative response I've gotten on the video is because people think that because I said this movie is racist or has racist elements, and they like the movie, they're thinking, ergo, I'm calling them racist. And like, that's not the case. Like, plenty of people have liked racist things without like, unwittingly. And so like, it's not a personal indictment. Like, we all like, the idea is that, you know, once you know better, then you can grow from it. And even in cases of film or text that are problematic, you know, they exist now. Now we can use them for dialogue. So there's still positivity that can come out of it. So that's another reason why, or that's another reason behind why I started doing this anti-racist media literacy series, unpacking different books and movies and characters and texts, to start to look into some of these things that have been like accepted as like really great, but starting to problematize them. So one of the first ones I did was on, and there's only been like 3 in the series so far, so bear with me. But an early one I did was on To Kill a Mockingbird, which I know is just like a time honored, like beloved book for so many people. In particular, a lot of like quote unquote liberal white folks. And so I remember reading the book in high school, and I think I probably enjoyed it. It was one of the few books that even talked about issues of race, and so, you know, like that was progress, and you know, compared to all the other books that I had to read.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, my school was majority Black, but all the teachers were white, essentially. And so it's like, here, kids, we're gonna like here's your chance. And then, you know, you get to the book and you see like Tom Robinson and Calpurnia, these characters are sort of just like off to the background. But you know, even reading it as a Black person, like I sympathize with Scout, and I think that Atticus is like awesome for, you know, trying to defend this Black man. And I was a huge fan of A Time to Kill, and you know, all of these like white savior movies and messages. And so again, it wasn't until I got to college that I had the tools and the language to sort of start to unpack and criticize these things. And so honestly, I was expecting this level of backlash to the that I got to sold to the To Kill a Mockingbird video, because like so many people, and the fight really happened on Facebook more so than in the comments on YouTube. But there were just so many people who were just like, no, like I'm going to teach this book until the day I die, and you will not change my mind. You will not make me think that anything less than this book. Harper Lee is a saint. Like, all right, you know, that's, you know, it's interesting because I think it's sort of a microcosm for like race relations. So like, if we won't give up a book, if we won't problematize a movie, right? Like these are sort of like, in the grand scheme of things, relatively low stakes thing, like you would think. But like, no, like white supremacy says, like, no, we will like, there will be no challenge to the things that we've deemed to be like good and pure, even if it's just a book. Like, and so
You have to pry my cold dead hands off of them as
exactly, like I could have 10,000 people of color telling me that this is a problem, but because it resonates with me, that's more important than what they're saying. And so I'm going to continue teaching the book. I don't care about the Black kids in my class and how it makes them feel. I don't care that it's a flat representation of race relations that, you know, I mean, the book was written literally 60 years ago, and yet, you know, it's still a primary text to help kids understand racism. Whoa.
Yeah.
And so
I think it's interesting. Races and racism are not monolithic experiences, and so what's real and resonates for one person who's Black may be totally different experience from someone else and someone else and someone else, and like holding space for all of it and allowing all of those lived experiences to be okay and worthy. I think is what's hard, can be very hard for people.
I would agree with that, but I also think that so often, in particular, like white people who are trying to defend whatever it is that they think they need to defend, will so often weaponize the voices of other people of color. So I had that happen a lot in my comments. So like, you know, whether it's like I have a Black friend thing, or you know, this Black person, or I've had people say like in their comments, say, hey, someone else Black, like someone Black. Tell her that she's wrong. and I've definitely had people who are like, well, as a Black person, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But then I've had other people say, that like, as a Black male music teacher, jazz musician, like in real life, this, like, your video resonated with me, like this is spot on. And so I think you're right. Like, one, everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? Like, I don't think anti-racism work is about forcing people to buy into anything unwillingly. That's not going to work. For me, like the work I'm doing, I'm really not necessarily focusing on converting the non-believers, but more so trying to like help people who are already kind of like getting towards that space. But I also do want to leave space for people to say, like, this doesn't resonate with me. I think Ibram X. Kendi's book, what is it? How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Mhm.
I picked it up in the spring because I'm just like, it was just so popular, and like all like in folks at my job were talking about it. And so I'm like, well, if I want to do this work, like I should probably be up on the latest in like the anti-racism world. And that book, like I have my own like set of critiques, but I thought overall like it did a really good job of taking a really introspective look at the issues of racism. So I think the author does a good job of problematizing himself. Like, hey, like I was an ignorant Black person. Like I got up and gave a whole speech like trashing Black people. So, and like even problematizing the idea that like Black people can't perpetuate racism, like,
Mhm.
like that really resonated with me because there have been many folks, whether they're grifters who are just trying to make a buck off of being contrarian, whether it's like a Fox News,
Mhm.
cash grab or whatever it is, like, and so there will always be people of color or women or whatever people who are part of the quote unquote marginalized group who will participate in the oppression of that group. And so for me, one of the things I learned in working at Sankofa, my boss, I had a really tough like parent teacher conference one day, and I thought like the father was like he giving me some like unfair criticisms, and
Mhm.
I basically like I told him off but in the most professional way, but like it was just like I cut down each of his arguments point by point by point. And after the meeting, she like pulled me to the side and she's like, listen, like you don't weaponize your words against your own people. You don't recognizing like your power position and the fact that you have this knowledge and this person doesn't, like you don't use that to like you know be oppressive. So I try to even think about that when I'm responding to people who would be allies or people who are other people of color, and like always being like gracious. And if I can't be gracious, then not respond at all. Because I don't want to be a part of, because I think a lot of the work, whether any kind of liberation work, it can become oppressive when people become so like dogmatic and and just narrowly focused in their view that they will shun people for not aligning with them 100%, and miss out on a lot of opportunities to build really great coalitions and to have really great dialogues. Like some folks who've like taken me on in the comments will turn around and subscribe, and so it's been really eye-opening for me. And I don't know, just it's a journey, and it's fun, but it's also just like really draining. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, we're out of time, and I want, like, I feel like I have 6 more whole hour-long conversations that I want to have with you. So maybe we'll have a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4. But Brandee, thank you so much. So we'll put the website. It's the antiracism academy.com,
that's the website, yes.
and we'll put your YouTube
Yes. And
on.
so you can go to the website and sign up. The YouTube channel is, yes, please put the link in the description to that. Please subscribe, check out the videos. And so we're hoping to launch our sort of beta test for our paid content next month. And so I'm going to start advertising that on the channel for people to come and sign up for free so they can start to access the website.
Awesome. Well, I looked on the website, and it looks like there's already stuff on there there's different level of programs to sign up. Can people already sign up, or that's?
So that's, it's sort of right now it's sort of more of sort of a landing page, but that's going to be
Okay.
what the that's going to be the content that's available. But before I actually start taking on paid subscribers, I really do want to get feedback from folks and make sure that the content and the courses that we're offering are aligned with what people really need. And so yeah, So please be
Okay.
on the lookout.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Brandee, for all the work that you do and for who you are and for, saying the things that need to be said.
Thank you so much, Jill.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for having me.